Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Warriors Path podcast. I'm Alan Baker. Today, we're going to be talking about a question I got this week from a viewer about self-protection. So we're going to talk about the difference between self-protection and self-defense, and then look a little deeper into self-protection and some of the things you can do in advance to prepare for a possible encounter or violence. Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about a topic that was really brought to me by one of our listeners. And I got it through email. I've been getting some great questions and feedback lately, which really influences, obviously, where we go on the show. So, with that said, if you have something, feel free to reach out. So this individual was watching a lot of the content and stuff we're putting out on the video archives, and he's been watching a lot of the hosted events that we've been putting together for this year. And his problem was he is an older gentleman, and he's getting to the point physically where he is unable to do those types of things, and possibly physically respond to a threat. And he was looking for answers for that. And he actually took the time to write a lengthy email, which is fantastic. And so I wrote him back, but it was compelling me to touch on the topic on here as well, because I ended up returning some good information for him, and you may benefit from it as well. So one of the things initially we've got to talk about, and I point this out quite often, is the difference between self-defense and self-protection. For me, I divide it up as two totally different things. Self-defense is, exactly what you would think it is in this industry. It's learning defensive measures, defensive tactics. To me, it includes firearms training, bladed weaponry, empty hand training, anything all the way up through a elevated social reaction, even to verbal exchange. Self-protection, on the other hand, has a lot to do with the pre-planning and changes you make in advance of a situation. And that's something we're going to discuss. We're going to focus on a little more with this question, for obvious reasons, because the individual that wrote the question or had the question for me was, like we said, he was to the point where maybe he can't do those answers, or he can't make it out to those training situations. So just a little more detail on him. He was a ex-police officer, and so which right away tells me he has some experience with firearms. But one of the things he said in an email is he was getting to the point where he was even unsure if he could manipulate a firearm appropriately in a stressful situation, just due to physical limitations and being older. And he was concerned because he's always been able to have a plan and handle these things. But as he's got to more of an advanced age, he's seeing the ability to do that go away and start to fade, which led to his question to me. And it also leads to why I talk about the division between self-defense and self-protection. I'm sorry. So self-protection, one of the things for me in my experience, I look at it like what a bodyguard would do for you if you were to hire him to increase your level of security. I've been in the bodyguard world now for about 15 years, done the work, built programs for them, been an instructor at the Executive Protection Institute for the same amount of time. So I had an opportunity to be immersed in the industry, which has been a fantastic experience. And one of the fantastic things about that is getting to see what a security professional will do for a client when you hire them. And why is that relevant here? Because a lot of that information we can learn as civilians and we can implement it on our own. Now, obviously, we can't do all of it. When it gets to physical protection, actually having a body agent there working for you and handling the environment, anything that could potentially come up, that part is not going to be included in this idea. But you look at a lot of the pre-planning and calculations that they do in advance, that stuff is extremely valuable to us as civilians. And, since let's say you're in a situation where I am unable to respond physically, I know that I'm not going to be able to handle this physically when they come in. And maybe I have some sort of limitations that is going to limit my use of firearms. Well, right away, that tells me I've got to do a lot more work on the front end with pre-planning, or in the protection industry, what is commonly referred to as advance work. I have to pretty much do my own advance work. What is advance work? Not every protection agent will actually work a client. In other words, they won't be a body agent. They're actually standing next to you protecting them. There are individuals that work in the field and all they do is advance work. So let's say I have a client and he's going to go into another country for a business meeting. While he's there, he wants to visit a restaurant and he gives me several other things on a schedule that he wants to do. If I am the advance agent, what I will do is I will travel there a day or two before and I will go to every location that individual is going to go to and physically take a look at the location, run through a mental list, a checklist in preparation for his arrival so I can get ahead of the curve. For instance, if we're going into a restaurant, I may want to know where are the exits, where are the hard rooms, meaning what rooms will absorb bullets, rounds. Where's my cover? Where's my concealment? Where are the good guys? Where are the bad guys? Where are the guns? What are my access to them? How can I use the environment to my advantage if it gets to the point that I have to? What are the routes I can take into that area, driving-wise? What are the routes I can take leaving the area? Do I have more than one option in case something happens? I want to know where the local law enforcement is, where the local emergency facilities are. I want to know what those facilities are rated to. So I'm going to look into all of that prior to that trip and even more. So that's just an example of the mind tools available that we want to talk about. So a lot of this stuff you can learn yourself and be able to do. And so when I wrote the email back to this individual, I gave him some of these examples, and I was just going to run through some of those here. Maybe you've never thought of this idea. Your idea of self-defense has always been, I do martial arts, I'm a shooter, okay, I'll handle everything like that. And if you thought of it, you may want to add on the front end of it, which is the self-protection side of it. One of the first mind tools I learned when I first got involved with EPI, the Executive Protection Institute, was to think like the bad guy, was to take the time to put myself outside looking in as a bad guy and look at my own situation and go, what would I do to get to Alan? Where would I go? What would I use against him? So just that concept and taking the time to change your perspective into that bad guy's perspective and take note of those things from the outside looking in. And one of the things for me when a client hires me and I come in, one of the first things you'll do is do a threat assessment. And, you'll do a thorough assessment of the potential threats and risk to the client's safety. You do the same thing for yourself. Now, for me, it would be I would look at first the locations. I'd do a threat assessment on the house. Next, I would look at common driving routes I take every day. I'd look at the building I work in. Any place that I go to on a regular basis, I would take the time in advance to run through that assessment and get advanced knowledge of those ideas. Understanding what I would do if. Now, I did a podcast previously, and it was called The Pillars of Vulnerability. And again, this is just another area that I learned from EPI. And you could look up that podcast, and it'll go into more detail on this, but it gives the basic pillars of what makes you vulnerable. And so that would be the next thing I would take a look at as I'm doing the threat assessment. One is, what is your predictability? How predictable are you? And again, if we're the bad guy looking at ourselves, that's something I want to recognize is your predictability. What do you do on a regular basis? Do you travel the same route to work? Do you stop at the same coffee shop every day coming home from work? Do you park pretty much in the same spot in that parking lot every day on your way home from work? And this leads to the next area is, how accessible are you? Are there any physical limitations between the bad guy, me, and you? So if every day you stop at the same coffee shop, park pretty much in the same place, I could show up early, park my car next to where you normally are, and just wait on you to show up. You get out of the car, and right away I'm within 5 feet of you, if that is my goal. So how accessible are you? Your lack of resources. That could be, if we look at the home, a security system on the house, different types of devices that may limit entry to the house or limit access to the house in the first place. And then the fourth thing would be just lack of training or planning. And for instance, this may be something you've never thought of. And if it is, where can I get that training? Where can I go to learn this stuff? Where can I go to learn how to do this planning and to do advanced work? And, for me, I suggest EPI to people all the time for this reason. You don't have to be a professional in the protection industry to implement the information and knowledge that they teach. Actually, a large portion of it you could learn as a civilian and use for yourself to protect yourself and your family. So with that in consideration, you go through the assessment, start looking at yourself through that lens of the bad guy. Then you start looking at security planning. I want to develop a plan that is tailored specifically to my needs and circumstances. If I can handle it physically, I know that I have to possibly arrange things differently at the house depending. Once I put on those bad guy glasses, what if they come to the front door? What if they get through the front door? I would run through that whole process and ask myself, what can I do to prepare for this? And some of the examples would be like a safe room or a panic room. If I know that I'm not going to confront them physically, I would probably want to locate a good safe room in the house and take the precautions necessary to make it more of a hard room, to make access to it more difficult. Is there a communication system in there? What is my plan to get there? Outside of the house, and we already mentioned this, is taking a look at driving routes through the same filter that we discussed earlier. Your cyber security. When you are online, this is a huge one. And I think it's getting worse because I hear more and more about this, and it's becoming a larger area of offering in the industry. What is your plan? How do you protect your information? Community engagement would be another one. I have a neighbor where I live, an elderly neighbor, and she introduced herself one day, and through conversation, it just came up that if she ever needed anything, I'm right next door. And I'm like, hey, here's my cell number. If you need me for anything, text me. I'm one of those people. I look at myself as a protector, and I train to be so. And, I don't know how many we have in the neighborhood, but if you need one, here I am. So get to know the community around you. And if you have those protectors that are willing to do something to come help you, who are they? An example of that may be a law enforcement officer that lives in the neighborhood, security officer that lives in the neighborhood, depending on what type of neighborhood you have. I would want to know emergency response protocols. It may not necessarily be the bad guy. It may be something of an emergency, of a disaster that I've got to deal with. If it is the bad guy, my interaction with them may require an emergency response. Am I prepared for that? Do I have a plan? Do I have communication set up? Do I know where the facilities are to my home? And do I know multiple different routes to get there, just in case one of them is blocked by construction or something? And then I would want to identify physical security vulnerabilities. Protective measures that I can take to lessen my vulnerability. Risk mitigation, pretty much. Physical security enhancements. An example of that would be, for me, if I were in that situation and I know I couldn't handle it physically, maybe I'm not able to manipulate that firearm, one of the first things I would change would be the front door, the back door on the house. I would harden that entry quite considerably. And I would look at options in case something were happening. How can I make it a harder point of entry? Same thing with the window security. How can I create more of a barrier against entry into the home? What does that look like? There are a lot of different options. That industry has really grown in the last 10 years. Security systems, motion sensors, even the signage that the security companies will put into your yard. We had one installed at the house, and they gave me one sign. And I told them, look, I'd like more. I'd leave 4 of them. I'll pay you for them. Because that in itself is a visual deterrent. So if you don't have that, something easily you could put in place. The alarms itself, because I test them out once we had them put in, a lot of times there's just a panel inside the house, and that panel has an alarm on it, and it's pretty loud, but it's still inside the house and not as loud as I would like it to be. So we purchased an additional horn to go on the outside. Just the noise from an attempted entry will a lot of times deter someone that's looking for an easy meal. They don't want a hard fight. And that would also show me their intent. If that's going on, and I've taken all these precautions and they're still trying to come through the door, that gives me more information on what I'm dealing with. Outdoor lighting, double it easily. And this is something that can easily be done. Landscaping around the home. Limiting access to windows. You can pick certain types of hedges that are going to be even more difficult to navigate just to get to the house. Locating them properly. Secure fences and gates, if that's an option. Some places you can't, but if you live in a place where you can, it's a good option. It's an added barrier and another point of resistance. Okay, guys, quick break in. If you are getting value out of the show, please give us a like and subscribe. Also, if you know someone that might benefit from this content, please share us with them, and we'll help our community grow so that we can get out there and help more people. Then another thing we'd look at is, what are my habits on a daily basis? How can I increase my awareness? And, right off the bat, it makes me think of surveillance and counter surveillance. Generally, and there are exceptions to this, but most encounters or attacks are preceded by some type of surveillance, even if it's just a small amount. If it's a planned, there's more. Now, the exception is random acts of violence, of course, but we want to be aware of that. And how can I counter surveil? So an example of that, and again, this is another tool that I learned at EPI was the standoff footprint. The standoff footprint is, let's say you walk outside your home and you are thinking like the bad guy and you're going to surveil yourself because I want to see what your vulnerability is and your predictability. And that way I can find the easiest point to get done when I want to get done. So where would I sit in order to watch you? Now, I can't just sit in the middle of the road because that's obvious, and I don't want to be obvious. I don't want to get caught. So I have to find an area that gives me access visually so that I can watch, but I also don't want to bring too much attention to myself. So if you go out and look at the home and look for these areas, with a little thought, you can pick them out pretty well. That is your standoff footprint. So if I know what that is, I can make it a daily habit just to use optics on that area whenever I go by. So if I'm driving out of the neighborhood, make it a habit to look and just be aware. Raise your awareness. Next would be varying your routine. Now, we've mentioned this as well, how predictable you are. So you can vary your predictability. Pick another route. Like we said, have 2 or 3 different routes you can take to work, mix them up. And we are creatures of habit, so you have to change your habit to be more unpredictable to someone that is trying to surveil you or watch you. Technology can be used. Cameras can be used as counter surveillance. This is actually a very common thing with different clients in the protection industry. And just the fact that they're there, I've actually had clients use dummy cameras because, it's not an easy meal. It's more resistance for me because as the bad guy, I don't want to get in trouble. This could be a tremendous amount of information. And one of the main reasons I want to talk about it today was just to introduce that concept of self-protection outside of self-defense. Self-defense is a pretty easy answer to go find. It's, in my opinion, I look around, it's readily available. It's a huge industry. Self-protection, at a civilian level, again, not so much. And it's not that you can't find that information. I don't think it's just a thought pattern that's readily available out there. So that's one of the reasons I want to introduce it, especially for the individual that we're talking about. He's getting to the point where he can't exist in that physical answer side anymore. So we're going to have to spend more time on the planning and the advanced work and really start to build up our skill set on that end and try to beat the encounter ahead of time. This is the same goal that you'll see a protection agent. They really don't want to put on the fighter's hat. They want to win that exchange prior to it ever happening. I want to limit all of those things so that the bad guy never gets access to the client in the first place. And again, with the same information, we can do the same thing for ourselves. Okay, guys, that is it for the day. Hopefully you got something out of it. You got some value. Keep in mind, you have the ability to shift your perspective, to change the way you look at things. And from that shift, you can take action and create change and transform your environment and your world. Okay, guys, one quick break for a shameless plug. We are working on a couple of things that we're offering, and one of them is the video archives. We've actually been doing a lot of recording for this year, and really stepping up a lot of the information that we have in those archives. We have three of them. One of them is grappling based, one is more self defense focused, and the third one is based on the Warrior's Path self improvement program. If that's something you're interested in, you can find all of that and where you can sign up on the main website at sifuallenbaker.com.